Good evening, and welcome to the Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina Dialogue for a Healthier Community. I'm Nancy Faye Jensen. I go by Nan. I am the Dean of the College of Health and Human Services at UNC Charlotte, and I couldn't be more proud to have you all here at the Center City building, although I know a lot of you have already been here a few times here and there, so welcome. It's April Fool's Day, yes, but it's also the kickoff of National Public Health Week. And the theme of this year's National Public Health Week is about return on investment, that investing in public health, in our own individual health, the greatest return on investment is saving lives, and it's about saving money. Please visit the Department of Public Health Sciences website if you want to learn more about what we're doing for Public Health Week. But our kickoff tonight is happening here, and you are in the thick of it. And we are very thankful that the Department of Kinesiology and the College of Health and Human Services and Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina has sponsored this program along with the College of Health and Human Services. Now, my college, I love saying my college, it's wonderful. I've been here a year and a half, and I couldn't be happier to be here. This college is one that is totally committed to being involved with and serving our local community. And we work with our local communities to solve problems around health and well-being, about access and equity. We're very interested in looking at the social determinants of health and addressing those. And what we really want is to improve the quality of life for all Charlotteans and all North Carolinians, and to extend that life and give them more life to their years. Tonight, Scott Gordon, our new chair in the Department of Kinesiology, will kick off our discussion about healthy aging, a topic that I know is preying on my mind, and maybe for some of you soon will. After Scott's presentation, we're going to open it up to questions, and there will be some new food out there, new healthy food, and more libations, and I hope you'll join us for that. But most importantly, if you were outside milling around, you probably saw the handouts that we have. On the back side of the handout are some stops that you can make out in the atrium lobby after the presentation, and you can have your blood pressure checked, you can have your pulmonary function checked, and you know, we have our incredible kinesiology faculty and their students here who can answer your health questions, and you can have that easy screening done. This is also somewhat of a preview. It's a preview of our new health risk assessment program that we are launching out of the Department of Kinesiology, and we hope to serve both athletes and the general community as well through that program. I want to extend my thanks to the Dean's Office and also to the Department of Kinesiology for knocking themselves out to get all the equipment here and all the personnel here to make tonight happen. And speaking of equipment, I had heard from the Chancellor's staff folks that he was going to be a very willing subject and don spandex and get in our bod pod. But I don't see him here. He has suddenly disappeared. I'm really not sure what's happening. And quite honestly, if he sees the video of this, this may be my last act as dean. But anyway, shifting gears away from spandex and my boss, I want to acknowledge and thank our sponsoring partner. As many of you know, Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina is a great supporter of health and wellness in our community. They serve as a founding supporters for the 7th Street Public Market just across the way, and also for the absolutely wonderful B-Cycle program that is available throughout Center City and the Charlotte region. And this bicycle exchange program is the largest one of its kind in the Southeast. And so if you haven't gotten on a bike, I encourage you to do that. What a great way to get around the city, and it's so creative. Earlier today, also, Blue Cross Blue Shield spent some time at Johnson C. Smith University, where they dedicated an urban garden. Just further testament, another example of how committed they are to serving the Charlotte community, and so I want to thank you for that. Their generosity is also consistently felt on the UNC Charlotte campus, where not only have they supported this dialogue for a healthier community, but they also provide us with substantial funds so that we can bring you the Chancellor's Speaker Series that happens every fall. And I know that we're working on a stunning speaker to come this fall, according to the Chancellor, and we'll know more about that later. I also want to recognize Ellie Clary. Ellie, you're going to have to step out of the shadows. Ellie is our Director of Charlotte Community Relations for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. He worked so closely with us on the details of tonight's program and made the program possible. We have the good fortune of not only knowing Ellie as an alumnus of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, but he's also been an incredible supporter of the College of Health and Human Services, serving on my advisory board. I don't think I'm ever going to let him go off. We're changing bylaws so Ellie can stay on for life. But he's also on the Athletics Foundation Board and the Foundation Board for the University of North Carolina at Charlotte as well. I'd like to thank Ellie for his friendship and support of the university. Thank you. We're also very privileged to have with us today Brad Wilson, who's the president and CEO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina with us tonight. Brad is a lifelong North Carolinian, and every time I see him, I gush about how much I love living in North Carolina, and it's true. He is a member and past chair of the University of North Carolina Board of Governors, and so he understands what we do very, very well. Brad holds 3 degrees from the state of North Carolina. His bachelor's is from Appalachia State. He's got a master's from Duke University and a degree in law from Wake Forest. Before joining Blue Cross and Blue Shield in 1995, he practiced law and was actually the general counsel for Governor Jim Hunt. Brad has shared that he views leading Blue Cross as a culmination of his commitment to North Carolina, its people, and the close to 4 million customers who depend on the company. I've personally benefited from knowing Brad and his advice, and I want you to join me in welcoming Brad Wilson to the podium.
Well, thank you, Nan, and thanks for inviting us to participate this evening. I am glad that after a long day here in Charlotte that I was able to stay long enough to say just a word and do the introduction. But the reason that Ellie is standing over here, he's waiting to whisk me off to the airport because I've got to go back tonight to get ready for an early day tomorrow, so I apologize for missing the presentation. But we hope you understand by our commitment that we feel very strongly about the work that you are doing. And we thank you for the work that you're doing because it's so critically important as all of us in North Carolina and around America are paying more attention than ever before to issues of health and well-being. And certainly a part of that is how well we live as we age. And like many of you and all of us, regardless of your age, you need to pay attention to that. As one who just celebrated a birthday with a 0 in it, it's kind of shocking every time the clock ticks every 10 years in particular. But by focusing on issues in aging and the component parts of all the things that go into that, like access, nutrition, physical activity, and community health promotion, this campus, UNC Charlotte, is setting itself apart in our state's healthcare system. Now, that's not surprising to me as one who has been engaged with the university system for a good while, and it's certainly not unusual. Your College of Health and Human Services is a leader in preparing students to use their talents and experience to improve healthcare here in North Carolina and across the nation, and it is perfectly aligned with our mission at Blue Cross, which is to lead the transformation of healthcare here in our state. And also recently heard about another distinction for the college, and that's your new doctoral program in nursing practice. This degree will prepare graduates to improve quality and patient safety in an evidence-based setting, and we certainly need more of that. So congratulations to Nan and to Dr. Dee Baldwin of the School of Nursing for your leadership in establishing this new program. One of the hallmarks of excellence for your college is the expertise of your faculty. In fact, when you were planning this evening's dialogue for a healthier community, you didn't have to look across the country to try to find an expert to come and share their wisdom with you. You just looked up the hallway and found one of your own to come and speak to this issue tonight. Dr. Scott Gordon is professor and chair of the Department of Kinesiology, and he's certainly a great choice to kick off the university's celebration of National Public Health Week. Dr. Gordon has focused his career on the effects of exercise in younger and older adults, the aging process, and on skeletal muscle remodeling with aging. I also understand that he's one of your newest faculty members, having come from East Carolina. So apparently you decided that you look better in green than in purple. And I know that everyone is thrilled that you made that choice. So I won't mention your name the next time I go down to East Carolina. He's lined up with what should be a fascinating talk. Listen to the title, Fitting into Your Genes. That's genes with a G, although I know maybe some of us struggle fitting into our genes with a J from time to time. But let's face it, no matter what your age, you have a vested interest in your own health and in healthy aging. No one wants to see a parent or a grandparent struggle with chronic disease or physical or mental disabilities later in life. We owe it to ourselves to understand how to make healthy choices while we are young, and we owe it to ourselves to establish healthy habits for our entire life. So to help us all learn more about healthy aging, please join me in welcoming your Dr. Scott Gordon.
I appreciate it. Have a safe trip back. Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Do you know that today's children are in the first generation in the history of humankind expected to age more quickly and die younger than their parents? And did you also know that one of the problems may be our current society's attitude towards current medical care? So there's a problem. And by the end of this talk, I'm going to present you all with two challenges in your own lives that may help to fix this problem. So how do we fit into our genes? Well, to do so, we have to trace our genetic and societal history back through the evolution of humankind. But let's start by just taking a look at current society, the industrialized technological society we live in today. As a matter of fact, let's just look at the past 25 years and look at obesity. Starting in 1985, here's a graph. The darker shade the blue, the worse. And just watch the colors change over the years. We're now in the 90s. In 97, they had to change colors. They couldn't get any darker blue. They had to go to shades of red and orange. So, tremendous rise in obesity over the past 25 years. This map only goes till 2010, but today approximately 70% of the U.S. adult population is either obese or overweight. It's pretty astounding. And guess where it's mostly concentrated? Right here in the southeastern U.S. And I include diabetes and heart disease right along with this, because obesity, diabetes, and heart disease are all part of what we call the metabolic syndrome. The metabolic syndrome is chronic diseases of a dysfunctional metabolism. Okay? And chronic disease means age-related. The causes and consequences of chronic disease worsen over the years during the lifespan. Now, an important point to remember, though, is age-related does not mean a disease of old age. What it means is that many times chronic disease the origins start early on in life, in your 20s, sometimes in your childhood. So the importance of that, and it progresses throughout age, and the importance of that is that you can start even in childhood or in early adulthood to start to prevent or delay chronic disease before it gets to the point later in life where it requires medical care. It's a really important point to remember. So chronic disease in the past 50 to 100 years has skyrocketed. The graph is on the steep upslope. And if we take this graph and we extend it over the course of millions of years, it looks something like this. For millions of years during the hunter-gatherer era and agrarian era, scientists widely believed that chronic disease was very, very low, almost non-existent. And it wasn't until the past 100 years or so, but especially the past 50 years, that chronic disease has skyrocketed. Now, a lot of people like to focus on genetics as the root cause of chronic disease. But the problem with focusing just on genetics is you're missing a larger part of the picture. Because human genetics and the human genome has not changed in approximately 2 or 10,000 years. So how can this recent epidemic in the past 100 years be due to a change in the human genome? So it's not due to a change in our genetics. It's due to our pre-programmed genetics that have passed down from our ancestors reacting to a change in the environment, like lifestyle choices. So let's take a look at our ancestors and see what genes they passed down to us. Let's take a look at the hunter-gatherer era, the Paleolithic era, also known as the Stone Age. Okay. Paleolithic evidence, evidence from archaeology as well as from modern hunter-gatherer societies indicate that these people were extremely physically active. Men typically went out and did the hunting. Women and children did the gathering. Very physically active. Many times food was days apart. They would have to walk miles, even hundreds of miles, to find their next meal. So it was a very physically active society. And so all of this physical activity played upon their genes. And those tribes with genes that were responsive to exercise, we're talking genes that helped elevate metabolism to support physical activity, or helped muscles and heart adapt to the next bout of physical activity so they could go days upon days with physical activity. Those tribes with exercise-responsive genes were able to continue their physical activity to find more food. The tribe survived, and therefore they propagated their genes to the next generation. They handed them down. Those tribes with inferior genetics that were not responsive to exercise eventually came to a point where they were not able to be physically active enough to find food. The tribe starved, and they did not pass their genetics down. So our ancestors passed down a set of genes that were pre-programmed to expect and respond to physical activity. It was literally survival of the fittest genes. Okay? So what about millions of years later? About 10,000 years ago, evolution started to slow to a halt. Yet the ancestors still passed down from generation to generation their genetics. Even 10,000 years ago, we had an agrarian society, an agricultural revolution. This lifestyle was also very highly physically active. You all know what farming could be like back then, especially up to 10,000 years ago. So high daily physical exertion played upon, they still had this ancestral genetic program expecting physical activity. The high daily physical exertion played upon these genes. These genes expressed themselves in a very healthy fashion, and everything was good. These were very happy genes back then, okay? So what about today, all right? What about the modern industrial and technological age? Well, I don't have to describe to any of you what the problems are today, right? Technology has us sitting in front of screens most of the day. It also has us stopping from moving our bodies even when our bodies are actually in motion, okay? And of course, we're eating a lot of food. And what I really want to point out on this slide is our children who are at very high risk and the very generation predicted to age more quickly, and die younger than their parents. So our children have jump-started the aging process and the chronic disease process and are going to potentially die younger than their parents. And the reason is we still have this ancestral genetic program that expects physical activity. But now we're not giving the physical activity to those genes. As a matter of fact, we're sedentary. So these genes express themselves in an unhealthy fashion, or sometimes not at all. And this leads to metabolic disease. If you make yourself inactive and say plop down on the couch just for an afternoon to watch a Three Stooges marathon, we can measure the genetic response of that, and your genes, just within several hours, will start to change their expression with just that little amount of physical activity. Okay, so that means that physical activity every day to combat this is a very important thing. So lots of chronic disease, metabolic disease leading to an accelerated aging process. So we've come to a point in evolution that now we're at this point right here, okay? But we can choose what the next image in this progression will be. We can choose by lifestyle choices. It's up to us. It doesn't have to get worse. In some ways, it almost can't get any worse. It's pretty bad as it is. But let's go back again to our hunter-gatherer ancestors, because they passed down something else to us as well. Remember, very physically active, very nomadic. Sometimes they could go days without food. They had to evolve a mechanism to survive during those days so that they could live to find the next food. And what they evolved was believed to be a set of thrifty genes. Now, the thrifty gene meant that after a successful hunt or gather, they had plenty of food and they would feast. And they would feast quite a bit, most of the time, more than they needed for that particular day. Now, it didn't make any sense for those extra calories to go to waste. The body didn't want to waste them, so the body evolved what we believe to be a set of thrifty genes that would store these excess calories. And where did they store them? And here's where we start getting some interaction here. So where did we store the extra calories even back then? Fat tissue, right? It's okay. Everyone can say fat tissue. We all know that. Okay? Even though we don't want to admit it. Okay? But even back then, they stored the extra calories in the fat. But for them, this was good, because then they could literally feed off their fat for extended periods of food restriction and physical activity until they found their next meal. It was okay. They burned the fat, and they were not in a cycle that was unhealthy. It was a healthy cycle. It kept going. So those that survived to find their next meal passed down this thrifty gene. Those people without a thrifty gene or without that type of genotype did not pass this down because they did not survive to find their next meal. So they passed down this gene down through generations to the agrarian society. Now, in the agrarian society, it was a little bit different. It was more feasting on a daily basis. They'd harvest some food. They'd eat on a daily basis. They may store extra calories as fat tissue, but it really didn't matter that much because within hours to, at most, maybe a day, they were back out in the field working very hard and working off this extra fat. So again, nothing was accumulating. They were burning it all off. So again, a very healthy cycle, very happy genes. What about the thrifty gene today? Okay? The thrifty gene today is a problem. We've engineered physical activity out of this cycle, yet we still, as we all know, have a great ability to feast. So as we feast, these extra calories accumulate and accumulate. We're not burning them off because of physical activity. And as they accumulate, where do they accumulate? Fat tissue, okay? But not only fat tissue, when you eat sugars and fats, it goes into the bloodstream. and fats and sugars can accumulate in the bloodstream as well. So fat, and by the way, cholesterol is a form of fat. So excess fat and cholesterol accumulating in the bloodstream and arteries is a risk factor for what disease? Heart disease. Extra sugar accumulating in the bloodstream is a risk factor for what other disease? Diabetes. So here you have obesity, heart disease, and diabetes, the metabolic syndrome, chronic disease, age-related disease, accelerated aging, simply because we're not being physically active. Okay, so it all comes together like that. Now, we have a very powerful tool at our disposal. Okay, how many people remember the original Trivial Pursuit game? There was a question in there, and if you know the answer to this, just shout it out. What is the largest organ in the human body? Skin. So, see, everyone remembers that. When I talk to my students, they never remember things like that. I'm too old. So skin, and that's actually technically correct, except if you take all of the muscles of the human body, pull them all out individually, put them all together, and form one big organ, they are by far the biggest organ of the human body, by far. They comprise over 40% of body mass and comprise over 90% of whole body metabolism during intense exercise. It's a very powerful tool. So we actually call muscle a metabolic sink, okay? Meaning that it is poised to drain fats and sugar out of the bloodstream at a moment's notice. But there's a catch. What's the catch? We got to use them. You have to use the muscles. If you don't use them, it won't work. The only way to use them is the only way to elevate metabolism is to use them, and it pulls these fats and sugars out of the bloodstream. So it's a very important tool. So a healthier way to look at the thrifty gene hypothesis in today's society is to remember two things about our ancestors. First of all, they handed us down a set of genes that are pre-programmed to expect and react to physical activity. They also handed us down, whether we like it or not, a set of thrifty genes that are prepared to store any extra calories in the form of fat, and also there's accumulation in the bloodstream as well. So if we remember these two genetic facts that we're genetically predisposed to these things, we can now reintroduce physical activity into this pattern, as well as a healthy diet, open up this cycle again, and instead of all of these excess calories accumulating and leading to metabolic syndrome and chronic disease and accelerated aging, now the cycle opens up and it's a very healthy cycle. So it's simple as that, right? Just moving. Even Hippocrates, one of the earliest physicians, realized this when he said, fat people who want to reduce should take their exercise on an empty stomach and sit down to their food out of breath. This is over 2,000 years ago. He knew that exercise is medicine. It's truly a magic bullet for dozens of disorders. Okay? We're talking diabetes, obesity, heart disease, arthritis, osteoporosis, sleep disorders, respiratory disorders, a number of mental illnesses, a number of cancers, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer. It can delay or prevent all of these, and a multitude more I haven't even listed. So by delaying or preventing all of these age-related chronic diseases, oops, wrong way, then we can, by delaying the age-related diseases, we can delay the aging process. Exercise can truly delay your rate of aging. And let's not forget that a number of the disorders I listed aren't just for people who are overweight or obese. They afflict a lot of lean individuals as well. So It benefits everybody, lean and obese alike. And the really neat thing about this is what we call a primary prevention model in the medical model. It's a primary prevention, meaning that instead of waiting for chronic disease to progress to the point where you need to have drugs or medical care to pay for it later on in life, you can simply change the lifestyle behavior throughout life or earlier on in life to prevent this from occurring at all down the road. It saves tremendous amounts of money to you and to society in terms of healthcare costs and health insurance premiums, and not to mention quality of life. So everybody ends up paying for everyone else's health through health insurance premiums. So it affects us all. It's a community. So it's important primary disease prevention model. Now the problem with today's society is we're starting to program ourselves to think too much about treating disease and chronic disease only when it becomes a medical problem. So we think about treating diabetes or heart disease when you start to get diagnosed with these things, instead of thinking about preventing it in a primary fashion earlier on in life before it even gets to the point where you have to pay for it. So it would never occur to begin with. And here's an example of current societal thinking. So Wendy's is doing a good thing by donating to diabetes research if you buy 5 Junior Frosties. Frosties, which if you have enough of them, can predispose you to become diabetic. It's sort of an absurd mentality. And the worst thing about this slide is it's 5 Junior Frosties. It's geared towards a parent with a van load full of children to pull up to the drive-thru after the soccer match and feed these 5 kids. The very generation that's predicted to age more quickly and die younger than their parents. Here's another example. I walked into a medical school one time, and in front of me was a flyer for the medical students. The medical students had put up this flyer to raise money for the American Cancer Society. And it said, to raise money for the American Cancer Society, they were going to have a hot dog sale, okay? Hot dogs, which are loaded with nitrates and nitrites and other things that are linked to cancer. Hot dogs have been shown to increase your risk of cancer. So another example of this mentality. Last example I'm going to give you, and a lot of you will know about this one. It started right here in North Carolina. Has anyone heard about the Krispy Kreme Challenge Run? What's the challenge? You run a mile and then you eat a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts and then you run a mile back. Now, you don't have to eat the donuts if you don't want to, but a lot of people take that challenge. Now, at least there's running involved in that, so that's a good thing. But I guarantee you, I don't know if they're running on the way back, but I guarantee you 2 miles of running does not make up for a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts, okay? So it's this absurd mentality. So here's my first challenge to you, is to look for this mentality in daily life. It's all around us if you look for it. Look for this mentality that let's gear our thinking towards putting money and efforts into medical care later on in life towards chronic diseases at the expense of, I'm not saying you don't focus on that, but it's at the expense of primary prevention early on in life, which could have prevented these diseases in the first place, and you wouldn't ever have to worry about them later on, okay? So it's all around you. If you see it, or if you see someone talk about it like that, challenge it. Challenge societal thinking. It's really creeping into our medical model and our medical way of thinking. Even healthy exercisers fall into this pattern they're socialized into this pattern of using technology in today's society. Now, these people at least are exercising, but this really comes into play when we talk about people who are sedentary. We're pre-programmed to automatically do things to engineer activity out of our lifestyle. So especially for sedentary people, just a little bit of physical activity goes a long way. It doesn't take much. We have certain guidelines, but on a daily activity level, there's all sorts of things we can do on a daily basis. So here's my second challenge to you, is just on a daily basis, think about what you can do to reintroduce physical activity into your daily lifestyle. It could be as simple as taking the stairs instead of the elevator, okay? Over several flights. Or taking the stairs instead of the escalator. Or don't drive around for 5 or 10 minutes to look for that parking space closest to the mall entrance, okay? You'd actually get into the mall quicker if you just park farther away and use that for a little bit of physical activity. What about a nice healthy bike ride around uptown Charlotte? The Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina bike share program here in Charlotte, headed by Diana Ward, is a great example of ways to expend more calories. It's actually very inexpensive as well. And you're also helping to preserve the environment and protect the environment. Or you could bike right up the street here to the 7th Street Public Market. Also, one of the founding sponsors is Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina, under the direction of Mike Restano, for healthy choices in fresh local produce. These are simple choices you can make on a daily basis, and they're simple to do, but we face it on a daily basis. So my challenge to you is to make those choices, make the choice to be healthier, ward off chronic disease, and delay your rate of aging. Which brings me to my last point. Remember, chronic disease progresses throughout life. It's just not until later on in life when it becomes a clinical problem that we seek medical care. And that's why people think it's a disease of old age. But it really isn't. It progresses throughout life, and we can combat it throughout life. So you can choose to be sedentary, let your health decline, and let yourself age more quickly and be biologically older than the average population. Or you can choose to be physically active, let your health decline at a lot slower rate, and be actually biologically younger than the average population. It's your choice. And we can measure your biological age. We can give you an estimate of that. Age truly is a number. You may be 50 years old, and we can test you on a number of variables and tell you, you know what, you're 50 years old, but you have the body of a 43-year-old. Good for you, all right? Or what you don't want to hear is, yeah, you're 50 years old, but you have the body of a 57-year-old, okay? And your choices can make the difference. Now, it's important, choices you can make throughout the lifespan, but the important thing is you can start at any time in life. You can be 90 or 100 years old, and simply by becoming physically active, make yourself biologically younger, okay? You can enhance your body age at any point in life. So you can choose this as your future in your golden years, or you can choose this. All right? So you can choose to fit into your genes by a healthy lifestyle, healthy choices, fit into your genes, and age in a very healthful fashion. I think Edward Stanley said it best 140 years ago, who said, "Those who think they have not time for exercise or for bodily exercise will sooner or later have to find time for illness." And it holds true to this day. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
There's been a lot of, I've heard rather, put it that way, a lot of different thoughts about or recommendations about the amount of exercise, the amount of time. I've heard it range from 30 minutes to 60 minutes to 40, anything in between. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I find it hard to fit in 60 minutes a day.
Okay.
So what is your thoughts or recommendations about that?
Well, so the current Centers for Disease Control recommendation for physical activity over the course of an entire week is this is for minimal recommendation for health, okay? More is still better, but a minimal recommendation for health is 150 minutes over the course of an entire week. That's, say, 5 days, maybe 30 minutes a day. But the good thing is you don't have to do it at 30 or 60 minutes at a pop. Even 10 to 15 minutes at a time is not bad. And this is not even, and this is for moderate intensity exercise, brisk walking. And they also recommend a couple days a week of strength exercises. Now you can increase your intensity to vigorous intensity, say walking or running or jogging, excuse me, and reduce that time to 75 minutes a week for minimal health benefits. Now remember, this is minimal health benefits. You can get more health benefits by more minutes per week. But that's the current recommendation for the Senate. And it has been a debate for quite a while in trying to come up with these numbers, and there's confusion out there. But no matter what, something's better than nothing, right? The best benefits are going from sedentary to at least something, so.
How soon after you eat would you recommend exercise?
Well, that's a good question. Remember the old, don't go swimming after you eat because you might cramp up? Well, one of the reasons for that is because there's a competition for blood flow between the muscles and the stomach. In reality, during exercise, the muscles have such a powerful effect on blood flow. They really pull blood flow away from the stomach. So it's not, the biggest issue is how you feel and the comfort level. So, but it's still not recommended in athletes or anyone to have a huge meal and go out and exercise right away. Maybe some walking or something, but if you're going to get on a treadmill, you don't want to eat too much, you know, a few hundred calories, up to 500 calories or so, and then within the next hour you can exercise. But if you eat a 1,000-calorie meal or 1,200 calories, you don't want to get on the treadmill right away. Give it a couple hours.
Do you know if there's any effort by any particular organization that is trying to educate companies such as Wendy's and others as to the impact they are having? I remember meeting one time with people from Kellogg's, and they were talking, they asked the question of, what do you think the sales of Quaker Oats has been in the last 50 years? And the answer was, it was flat until they added sugar and cinnamon. So my question is there, and I would think you would know if there is, a national organization or some unit of the government that's trying to work with companies to help them to realize the impact they're having on our economy, on our health, and whatnot?
Well, that's a pretty complex question. There's a lot of organizations out there. One of our primary organizations called the American College of Sports Medicine, which deals with exercise for health, as well as a number of other things. And they do petition Congress, and I don't know to the extent to which they get involved with some of these other companies. Some of my colleagues out in the audience may be able to help me here as well. But there is pressure, but probably not enough pressure. But here's... Yeah.
Center for Science and the Public Interest is a group that is really putting pressure on industry. They do some of these news bits where they really scare people about how many calories or fat or something. That can be very effective. The American Dietetic Association as well has been working very closely with industry and trying to develop industry partnerships so that more healthful offerings are appearing on menus. Society for Nutrition Education is another group that really has been active working with industry. And what's noteworthy about that is we actually have seen in the last 10 or 15 years some options, at least, that would make you feel totally helpless if you were interested in eating more healthful food.
Dean Fay Jensen is a nutritionist, so that was a big help. One of the things, coming from a physical activity point of view, let me expound upon that, is that if you watch the media closely, it gets very frustrating from a physical activity point of view because the media like to focus on things that can blame external entities instead of personal responsibility. So it still comes down to us making healthy choices. And yes, corporations can be more friendly to that, no doubt about it. But we still have to make a personal choice when we walk into a restaurant, or whether we're going to exercise or not. So sometimes we tend to focus too much on external entities and not point fingers at ourselves, and I'm pointing fingers at myself as well. So.
I don't think I need the mic. This has been a great presentation. But my question is, to what extent does heredity have an impact on, life expectancy, even when you are a regular in exercise? You know the story of
Right.
Fix.
So that's a great question. The question is, to what extent does heredity or your genetics affect all of this? And the fact is, to a great extent, okay? Even though the human genome isn't really evolving too much anymore, we still have great diversity in that genome, and certain people and certain populations in the U.S. are at greater risk. So the way to look at it is physical activity or proper diet. It's still an interaction with, someone may be predisposed to diabetes or predisposed to heart disease because of the genetics they have. And you can't control your genetics. But the way to look at it is, it's always, the biological concept is genes interacting with the environment. So you can still change your environment to play the hand you've been dealt. It isn't perfect, but you make a great point. Genetics play a big role in a lot of this, but it's something that's out of our control. So we try to focus on what we can control and make the best of what we can. So that's a great point.
I have two questions. I'm interested in the research about running. Has it really been shown that it's unsafe to run with scissors?
Because of HIPAA regulations, I can't talk about you being the subject in that study. So
No, on a little more serious. I've read a few pieces about the brain chemistry involved and the effect that salt, sugar, and fat has on the brain, and that in many cases it's something like a reaction to cocaine or heroin, the dopamines, the industry is well aware of this. Places like Cinnabon, the reason that malls and airports have so much of that smell in there is that it triggers memories, and you have, according to one book I read, probably less than a second to block, to change the thought, I'm going to have a Cinnabon, So it's the habit forming of the kind of food that we intake, be it 10 or 12 Frosties or Cinnabons. But does that sound familiar to you?
well, let me do a classic. Yes, it does sound familiar to me. I don't know the research on diet, but let me do a classic move and divert your question to something I know something about. And actually, this really hits closely to home because we have people in our department, Dr. Michael Turner and Dr. Trudy Moore, and others who've worked on a project several years ago in the Department of Kinesiology where they looked at mice and how much they ran per night, and they spread it out, and they looked at many different strains of mice and looked at the low runners and the high runners. And they looked at the differences between this voluntary activity. And they found several differences, but one of the primary differences, I got to be careful here, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, is that the dopamine system in the brain tended to be downregulated for the runners. In other words, the runners were seeking a dopamine high, and it kept them running. It's basically like thrill seekers, okay, like an adrenaline junkie, that type of thing. So the people who are less apt to be physically active are people who have a very functional dopamine system, an upregulated dopamine system, which in this case is not such a good thing. The people with the downregulated dopamine system tend to seek out that stimulation, and which stimulates that feeling of euphoria And so they tend to exercise more. And we all know people who love to exercise and people who don't. There's some interesting things going on. Did I get that right, Mike?
Sorry, I just had a quick question. How do we actually go about finding out our biological age?
Well, interesting you asked that, because there's a number of different ways to do it. There actually are some websites you can look up, and you can enter some risk factors, hereditary issues, lifestyle habits, and things like that. But that only gets you so far. It's actually better to be tested physiologically in a number of different factors that show your biological age. You know, cholesterol level, indicators of heart disease, respiratory function, a number, body composition. So there are places where you can get tested, and we are actually in the process of initiating that type of program right in the Department of Kinesiology. So if on the flyers that you see outside, there's a way to contact us in that program and sign up for a spot to get tested for your biological age. So, but there are some programs online, websites online, where you can enter just a few things and it'll tell you biological age, but they're not as accurate because you really got to test, hands-on testing a lot of these physiological functions.
Oh, it's my turn. Okay. I was wondering if there's any state and local programs that encourages physical activity of ones that are obese, and which ones has already worked and has showed the most success.
State and local, so you're asking state and local programs that are encouraging physical activity for weight loss, and those that have had success. There are a lot of people here who've lived in this state and lived locally longer than I have, so maybe some of you can help me here. There's a lot of community level programs and community centers that promote it, but I think what you're getting at is the hard thing is getting people to do it. I was just talking with Diana Ward about the bike share program, that you can introduce it into certain communities as even for free, and they won't use it. So that's the hard part. So can anyone give me an example of a successful program like this?
UNCC has come out with a program about 4 years ago called 411 Fit. It's a web-based database that allows you to enter your goals, and it gives you a suggested diet in terms of calories, protein, fat, carbohydrates, salt, and water that you should take on a daily basis. I was struggling with my weight when I started this program, and over the past 4 years I've been able to take off about 15 pounds, keep it off, and actually make changes in the foods that I eat based on not seeing results, and it requires you to enter in your calories on a daily basis. But by looking at what you eat on a daily basis, it allows you to make the changes that you need to make to achieve the goals that you want to achieve. This is a free program. It's available to everybody, and I think that I'm happy that I've done it.
Well, thank you. That's great. And, so let me point out that this is good. What helps quite a bit is to be able to record intake, calories in versus calories out. There's some nuances in calories in versus calories out, but most of your weight loss is accounted for in calories in versus calories out, and good for you for following the program. Because the hardest thing, no matter what your numbers are, is to actually stick to it. And so that's where the problem lies in the general population, and that's why we, as a lot of people are here in the healthcare provision as well as in academia, to promote this with people. But that is the toughest challenge.
I really enjoyed your lecture, and it really provokes a lot of thought, and I'm going to take it back to children. I think when I was growing up, we had the opportunity to go outside and play hard, and you knew what it felt like. So you were dripping sweat. I grew up in Florida, but you didn't want to come inside once you got out, and you'd be playing hide and seek till dark. You played sardines, bum, 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 here we come. And, there was always this free play going on. And children don't have that opportunity today unless it's organized sports. most children grow up, I call it neglect or abuse, without being able to have that opportunity to know what it is to go out and play hard. More children know how to work an iPhone and sit there and have hours and hours of screen time a day, and yet don't have that opportunity to go out and play. Some of the issue is safety. You talk about parking at the mall as far as you can, but we do have to consider safety issues too when you tell people to go out and do that. And I just have a great concern. The prevention is the best key. Staying active is our best health care insurance for the future.
Right.
And it's, well, you know how bad it is with the
Right.
children of our country today. It's just growing, and people don't consider it, you know, a crime to not let their child play or have balance in their life. And it's got to be the social, it's got to be the
Right.
spiritual side, and as well as the diet and the exercise that combine to make that healthy child. And there's so many ways we can improve upon it, and I wanted to know your thoughts.
Well, there are definitely, I almost don't have to expound too much. There are definitely barriers to physical activity in the, not only because of technology and gaming and all sorts of things like that. At least we have things now like Wii Fit where they're actually being physically active when they're in front of the screen. But it's worse in underserved and underprivileged communities because children, if they come home from school, they don't want to be out on the streets. That's even worse. It's actually dangerous to leave the house in some communities. So it's a real problem, a socioeconomic problem that's mixed in there as well. But we have to get creative. I was once asked, well, what would you tell a parent who's really busy and can't, and doesn't have time to promote physical activity in their children and doesn't have time to provide that type of an environment? And they acted like it was way down the totem pole. And my response was, well, what if your child were playing with matches, or what if your child had a firearm or something like that? Would you rectify that situation because it's putting their life in danger? We have to realize, just like you realize, that the priority that we need to place on this, so to make time for that or make a safe environment or do whatever you can to make them physically active. It's a matter of priorities, especially in a busy day, and that's what we have to convince people of. So it's a great point. Thank you all.